My name is Sophia Langford, and for a long time, I genuinely believed I had built a life most people would envy. At 32 years old, I was the senior marketing director at Apex Dynamics, one of the largest tech companies in Chicago. I had a beautiful downtown apartment, a circle of successful friends, and a reputation for always looking polished and professional. But behind the elegant dresses and confident smiles, I carried something much deeper. I grew up in a strict military family. My father was a highly decorated intelligence officer, and from a young age, he trained me in everything from strategic thinking to cybersecurity and crisis management. While other girls were at sleepovers, I was learning code and studying psychological operations. I joined the military right after college and served 6 years in intelligence before transitioning to the corporate world. On the surface, my life looked perfect. I was engaged to Richard, a charming corporate lawyer who came from a powerful family. We had a glamorous lifestyle: rooftop dinners, weekend getaways, and constant social events. Richard often told me how proud he was to have me on his arm. "You're the most beautiful woman in every room," he would say with that charming smile. I believed it was love. At work, I was the face of the company. The executives loved putting me in front of clients and cameras. "Sophia has the perfect image," they would say. I led major campaigns, closed huge deals, and consistently delivered results. Yet, I noticed how often my ideas were credited to male colleagues. I told myself it was normal in this industry. I pushed harder, stayed later, and kept smiling. My best friend Lena would sometimes warn me, "Sophia, they only see the package. Be careful." I would laugh it off. I know what I'm doing. I've earned my place here. I truly believed that. Richard and I were planning our dream wedding. We had already booked a luxurious venue and were talking about starting a family soon. I imagined a beautiful future successful career, loving husband, maybe even a little girl I could raise to be strong and independent. Everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. Little did I know that in just a few weeks, during an important boardroom presentation, my entire world would crack open. One arrogant executive would look me dead in the eyes and say the words that would change everything. "You're nothing but a poster girl." Those words would ignite a fire I had kept hidden for years. And when they finally discovered who I really was beneath the polished exterior, nothing would ever be the same again. The first cracks appeared so subtly that I almost convinced myself they weren't there. It started with small comments at work. During meetings, my boss, Mr. Hargrove, would often say things like, "Sophia, just stand there and look presentable while the team presents the strategy." At first, I laughed it off. I told myself it was just old-school corporate culture. But it kept happening. My detailed campaign proposals were frequently overlooked, while my male colleagues received praise for ideas that sounded suspiciously similar to mine. Richard also began changing. At first, it was little things. He started introducing me at parties as the beautiful face of Apex Dynamics, instead of mentioning my actual role or achievements. When I gently corrected him once, he smiled and said, "Come on, babe, you know that's what opens doors for us." His tone was playful, but something in his eyes felt off. My best friend Lena noticed it before I did. Over coffee one afternoon, she leaned in and said, "Sophia, I love you, but they're using you as arm candy. You're so much more than that. You're one of the smartest people I know." I brushed it off with a laugh. "It's fine, Lena. I know how to play the game. I've survived worse in the military." But the warning signs kept coming. During a major client pitch, I had spent 3 weeks perfecting the strategy. When the meeting started, Mr. Hargrove introduced me by saying, "And this is Sophia, our beautiful marketing director. She makes everything look good." The clients chuckled. I smiled through it, but inside I felt humiliated. Later, when I presented my actual plan, one of the younger executives interrupted me and took over the conversation. That night, Richard came home and praised how graceful I had looked during the meeting. Not my strategy, not my hard work, just how I looked. I started having quiet doubts. Late at night, I would lie awake wondering if I had become exactly what they wanted: a polished image rather than a respected professional. I remembered my father's training. Never let them see your full hand, Sophia. Always hold power in reserve. But I had been so focused on climbing the ladder that I had hidden too much of myself. Still, I pushed the thoughts away. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I had a great fiancé, a high-paying job, and a beautiful life. Why ruin it by overthinking? Then came the company gala. I spent hours getting ready, wearing an elegant black gown. Richard looked proud as we walked in. But during his speech, he referred to me as the lovely Sophia, who keeps the marketing team looking sharp. The room laughed politely. I smiled, but inside, something twisted painfully. Lena pulled me aside later and whispered, "You deserve better than this. You're playing small, and they're loving every second of it." I told her she was wrong. But deep down, I knew she was right. The cracks were widening. I had no idea that in just a few days, during an emergency board meeting. One arrogant executive would look me in the eyes and say the words that would finally break my silence. "You're nothing but a poster girl." And that single sentence would unleash everything I had been hiding for years. The tension at work had been building for weeks, but nothing prepared me for how quickly everything would unravel. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Mr. Hargrove called an emergency board meeting. Our biggest client was threatening to pull out, and the entire executive team was on edge. I had spent the previous 2 nights refining a complete crisis recovery plan. I walked into the boardroom confident, my presentation ready. As I began presenting, one of the senior VPs, a man named Victor Klein, interrupted me mid-sentence. "Sophia, sweetheart, no need for all the complicated details," he said, with a condescending smile. "Just give us the pretty version, you're good at that." A few people chuckled. My cheeks burned, but I pushed forward. Richard, who was also in the meeting representing legal, didn't say a word in my defense. He just looked down at his phone. That was the first real stab. Later that same day, I overheard a conversation in the break room that shattered my remaining trust. Victor was talking to 2 other executives. "She's great to look at, but let's be honest, she's just a poster girl. The real work comes from the team. We keep her around because the clients love her face." The words hit me like ice water. Poster girl. I stood frozen outside the door, my heart pounding. I wanted to walk in and confront them, but something stopped me. Years of military training kicked in. Never reveal your full hand until you're ready. That evening, I confronted Richard at home. "Did you hear what they said about me today?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. He sighed, loosening his tie. "Sophia, it's just office talk. You know how these guys are. You're beautiful and you're good at your job. Why make it a big deal? Because I'm more than my face, Richard. I have ideas. I have strategy. I have experience most of them don't." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "And that's why I love you. But sometimes it's smarter to play the role they want. It opens doors for both of us." His words felt like a betrayal. The man who was supposed to be my partner was telling me to stay in a box they had created for me. The suspicion grew stronger every day. I started noticing how often my contributions were minimized in meetings. How Richard would casually mention my look when talking about my career advancement. How Lena had been warning me for months, and I had refused to listen. The emotional tension inside me became unbearable. I would come home from work, take off my perfectly polished outfit, and sit on the bathroom floor, wondering how I had let myself become this version of me, beautiful, successful on paper, but deeply disrespected. Then came the breaking point. During the biggest quarterly review of the year, I presented a bold new campaign strategy that I had worked on for weeks. The room was silent as I finished. Before anyone could respond, Victor Klein leaned back in his chair and laughed. "Sophia, darling, you're nothing but a poster girl. Let the actual professionals handle the real strategy." The entire room went quiet. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others smirked. Richard said nothing. In that moment, something inside me finally snapped. I looked Victor straight in the eyes, my voice calm but ice cold, and said words I had been holding back for years. "You have no idea who I really am." The betrayal was complete. The people I trusted most, my fiancé, my boss, my colleagues, had reduced me to nothing more than a pretty face. But they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Because the woman they called a poster girl had a hidden power they were completely unprepared for. The boardroom was completely silent after Victor Klein's words landed. "You're nothing but a poster girl." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few smirked. Richard looked down at his notes, avoiding my eyes. Something inside me finally broke. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, feeling the weight of years of being underestimated, overlooked, and reduced to my appearance. Then I did something no one in that room expected. I smiled, a calm, cold, knowing smile. "You're right, Victor," I said softly. "I have been playing the poster girl for a very long time." I walked over to the large screen, plugged in my laptop, and opened a presentation no one had seen before. The title slide read, "Project Shadow Protocol, What I've Actually Been Doing." The room went deathly quiet as I began revealing the truth. For the past 3 years, while they thought I was just looking pretty and handling surface-level marketing, I had been running covert cybersecurity and competitive intelligence operations for the company. I had personally stopped 3 major data breaches, identified a corporate spy in our European division, and saved the company over $47 million in potential losses, all while letting the men in the room take public credit. Slide after slide showed classified reports, encrypted communications, and proof of my work that went far beyond marketing. Victor's face turned pale. Mr. Hargrove looked like he had seen a ghost. "And one more thing," I said, looking directly at Richard. "While you were busy treating me like arm candy and using my image to advance your own career, I discovered something interesting." I clicked to the final slide. It showed clear evidence that Richard had been leaking sensitive client information to a rival firm in exchange for personal kickbacks. The proof was undeniable: emails, bank transfers, everything. Richard shot up from his chair. "Sophia, what the hell are you doing?" I looked at him with calm eyes. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago. I'm done playing small." The room erupted into chaos. Executives were shouting. Phones started ringing. Mr. Hargrove demanded immediate explanations. In that moment, I felt both devastating heartbreak and powerful clarity. The man I was going to marry had been using me. The company I had given years of my life to had reduced me to a pretty face. The people I trusted had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I walked out of the boardroom with my head high while security was already escorting Richard out of the building. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of anyone. As I stepped into the elevator, the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on me. I had built my entire identity around being the perfect fiancé and the polished executive. And in one afternoon, it had all been exposed as a lie. I drove home in silence, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed on the couch and cried harder than I had in years. The poster girl they loved so much had just destroyed their illusions. But the cost was devastating. My engagement was over. My career at Apex was almost certainly finished. And the painful truth was now out in the open. I had never felt more alone. The days after the boardroom confrontation were the darkest I had ever known. I drove home in complete silence, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I finally walked into our apartment, the reality crashed down on me like a wave. I collapsed onto the couch and cried until my throat burned and my eyes swelled shut. Everything I had built my career, my relationship, my identity, had shattered in a single afternoon. Richard came home later that night. He didn't even try to deny the evidence I had presented. Instead, he got angry. "You played me, Sophia. You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." Those words cut deeper than any insult from Victor. The man I was going to marry cared more about his reputation than the fact that he had betrayed me for years. He moved out the next day. Just like that, our engagement was over. The wedding venue deposits, The future we had planned, the life I thought I had, all gone. Work became unbearable. Mr. Hargrove called me into his office the following morning and told me I was being placed on administrative leave. The board needs time to process everything, he said, avoiding my eyes. We both knew what that really meant. I was being pushed out. The isolation was crushing. I stayed in our now my apartment for days, barely eating, barely sleeping. Lena came over every evening, trying to pull me out of the darkness. You did the right thing, she kept saying, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment Victor called me a poster girl and how the entire room had laughed or stayed silent. The self-doubt was relentless. I would stand in front of the mirror at 3 a.m. and whisper, maybe they were right. Maybe I am just a pretty face. Maybe I never really belonged. The strong, intelligent woman who had served in military intelligence felt like a stranger now. All the years I had dimmed my light to fit in suddenly felt like a terrible mistake. I lost weight rapidly. Friends I thought were close slowly stopped reaching out. The glamorous life I had once lived now felt hollow. I would scroll through old photos of Richard and me and feel nothing but emptiness. How had I been so blind? The lowest point came on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I sat on the floor of my closet surrounded by my designer clothes, expensive handbags, and the engagement ring I could no longer bear to look at. I whispered to myself, who am I without all of this? Without him? Without the job? For the first time in my life, I felt truly worthless. The military training, the intelligence work, the strategic mind I had hidden for so long, none of it seemed to matter anymore. I was completely broken. But even in that suffocating darkness, a small, quiet voice began to speak. It reminded me of my father's words, "The greatest power is the one they never see coming." I didn't know it yet, but while I was falling apart, the full truth about how deeply I had been betrayed was still waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally came to light, it would change everything once again. The darkness that followed the boardroom was so heavy I thought I might never escape it. But in the middle of that pain, the full truth began to reveal itself, and it was far worse than I had imagined. Lena refused to let me drown. She came over every day, bringing food and forcing me to talk. One evening, while we were sitting on the floor surrounded by takeout boxes, she said, "Sophia, something about this feels too coordinated. Richard's reaction, Victor's confidence, it's like they already knew something. That comment planted a seed." The next morning, despite feeling completely broken, I started digging. What I uncovered over the following days shattered me all over again. Using the skills I had learned in military intelligence skills I had hidden from everyone, I accessed old company servers and emails. I discovered that Victor Klein and Richard had been working together for over 2 years. They had a secret side deal. Richard would feed Victor confidential client information, and in return, Victor would push Richard up the corporate ladder. I was just a pawn in their game. The most painful discovery came when I found a group chat between Richard, Victor, and 2 other executives. The messages were from months ago. Victor, Sophie's getting too ambitious with her ideas. We need to keep her in the pretty girl box. Richard, don't worry. I keep her distracted with wedding talk. She's easy to manage as long as she thinks I love her. Victor, perfect. She's our poster girl. Let her smile for the cameras while we run the real business. They had been laughing at me behind my back the entire time. The man I planned to marry had never loved me. He had been using me as a distraction and a trophy. But the deepest betrayal was still to come. I found encrypted files showing that Richard had been planning to leave me right after the wedding. He had already started moving money into a secret account and had even consulted a lawyer about a prenup that would leave me with almost nothing. The wedding was just another business move for him, a way to solidify his image as a family man for promotions. I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by printed messages and cried until I had no tears left. The pain was so intense, it felt physical. Every "I love you," every kiss, every future we had planned it, had all been a calculated lie. Even worse, Mr. Hargrove had known about their scheme and turned a blind eye because it benefited the company's image. New enemies were exposed. People I had considered mentors, colleagues I had trusted, and the man I wanted to spend my life with, they had all seen me as nothing more than a useful, pretty face. As I read through the final set of messages, one line from Richard burned into my memory. "She's smart, but she'll never use it. She wants the fairy tale too much." That was the moment the last piece of my old self died. The heartbreak was complete. But alongside the devastating pain, something else was rising, a cold, sharp clarity I hadn't felt since my military days. They thought I was just a poster girl. They had no idea what I was truly capable of. And now, with all this evidence in my hands, I was no longer broken. I was dangerous. The pain from the betrayal was still raw, but something inside me refused to stay broken. For the first 2 weeks after the boardroom explosion, I barely left my apartment. I cried. I raged. I sat in silence staring at the wall. But on the 15th day, I woke up and made a decision. I would not let them destroy me. I started small. I forced myself to go for runs in the early morning. I cooked real meals instead of living on coffee and sadness. I reached out to Lena, who became my anchor. She listened to me vent for hours without judgment and reminded me daily of who I really was. "You are not what they tried to make you," she said one night. "You are Sophia Langford, brilliant, dangerous, and unstoppable." Those words slowly began to sink in. I started going back to the skills my father had drilled into me during my military intelligence days. I updated my resume with my real capabilities: the cybersecurity work, the strategic operations, the crisis management experience I had hidden for years. I no longer dimmed my light. I also began rebuilding my confidence physically. I changed my wardrobe from the soft, pretty corporate look to sharper, more powerful styles. I cut my hair into a sleek, sophisticated bob. Every small change felt like taking back control. The most important work happened inside. I started therapy. For the first time, I admitted how deeply Richard's betrayal had wounded me. I grieved the future I thought I had. I grieved the version of myself that had stayed quiet just to be loved. And slowly, I began forgiving myself for trusting the wrong people. One powerful moment came when I burned the wedding planning binder in a small fire pit on my balcony. As the pages turned to ash, I whispered, "I release you. I choose me now." With every passing week, my confidence grew. I started freelancing as a strategic consultant, using my real expertise. The clients who hired me were shocked by how sharp and effective I was. Word began to spread quietly in the industry. Sophia Langford is not just beautiful, she's brilliant. The strategic thinking also returned. I spent late nights organizing all the evidence I had gathered: the emails, the financial trails, the recordings. I wasn't rushing into revenge. I was preparing something intelligent, clean, and devastating. Lena noticed the change first. One evening, she looked at me and smiled. There she is. The real Sophia is back. I smiled back. She never left. She was just waiting for the right moment. I was no longer the woman who dimmed herself to be loved. I was becoming someone who refused to shrink for anyone. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Richard and Victor were still out there, and the company was trying to quietly sweep everything under the rug. They had no idea what was coming. The woman they called a poster girl was now fully awake, and she was ready to make them regret underestimating her. After the initial storm passed, I stopped reacting and started planning. I turned my dining room into a war room. Every wall was covered with printed evidence emails, financial records, chat screenshots, and timelines. I worked methodically, just like I had been trained in military intelligence. This wasn't about emotional revenge anymore. This was strategy. Lena came over almost every evening to help. She brought coffee and takeout while I explained what I was building. "You're terrifying when you're focused," she said one night with a proud smile. I finally felt like myself again, the version of me I had hidden for years. I hired a top employment lawyer, Rachel Torres, who specialized in corporate misconduct. After reviewing everything, she looked at me across her desk and said, "Sophia, this isn't just harassment. This is a coordinated effort to undermine you professionally while benefiting from your image. We have a very strong case. Together, we built an airtight plan. I gathered every piece of evidence, recordings of meetings where I was belittled, proof of Richard's kickbacks, documentation of my actual contributions that had been stolen and credited to others. I also quietly reached out to several former colleagues who had witnessed the mistreatment and were willing to provide statements. But I wasn't only preparing legally. I started reaching out to key clients I had personally worked with over the years. Many of them were shocked when I told them the truth. Several expressed loyalty to me, not the company. I was carefully building a network outside of Apex Dynamics. The most satisfying part was watching Victor and Richard become nervous. Victor tried to call me multiple times. I let every call go to voicemail. Richard sent long emotional messages begging me to be reasonable and not destroy everything we built. I saved every single one. Mr. Hargrove even tried to offer me a quiet settlement and a glowing reference if I signed an ENDA and walked away. I politely declined. I wanted them to feel the full weight of what they had done. As the weeks passed, the suspense inside me grew. I could feel the storm building. I knew they were meeting behind closed doors, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. But they had no idea how much I had prepared. One night, while reviewing the final evidence folder, I whispered to myself, "You called me a poster girl. Now you're going to see what this poster girl is really capable of." I was no longer the woman who stayed silent to keep the peace. I was calculated. I was patient. And I was ready. The plan was almost complete. The evidence was overwhelming. My allies were in place. The final confrontation was approaching fast, and when it came, I would make sure every person who had underestimated me would never forget my name again. The first signs of their collapse came faster than I expected. It started with a quiet internal investigation at Apex Dynamics. My lawyer, Rachel, had filed a formal complaint with HR and the board, backed by overwhelming evidence. Within days, the company was forced to take action. Victor Klein was the first to feel it. I heard through a trusted colleague that he had been called into an emergency meeting with the CEO. When he walked out, his face was pale and sweaty. 2 days later, he was placed on administrative leave. The man who had once mocked me so arrogantly was now fighting to save his own career. Richard's fall was even more satisfying. The evidence of his kickbacks and information leaks reached the rival company's executives. They immediately terminated their under-the-table arrangement. Richard was fired from his law firm shortly after. I received a message from a mutual friend saying he was spiraling drinking heavily and telling anyone who would listen that I had betrayed him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even Mr. Hargrove, who had turned a blind eye for years, was feeling the pressure. The board started asking difficult questions about the company culture and why a high-performing executive like me had been systematically undermined. He tried to call me twice, leaving voicemails that swung between apologies and subtle threats. I saved every single one. For the first time, I felt momentum shifting in my favor. Lena came over one evening with champagne. "They're scared, Sophia. Victor looks like he hasn't slept in days. Richard is telling people you're crazy, but no one's believing him anymore." We sat on my balcony and laughed real, genuine laughter for the first time in months. But I didn't celebrate too early. I knew this was only the beginning. I continued building my case quietly. More colleagues came forward with statements after seeing that the company was finally taking the complaints seriously. My freelance consulting work was also growing rapidly. Several former Apex clients reached out directly, saying they wanted to work with me personally, not the company. The betrayers were losing control, and they knew it. Victor tried one last desperate move. He sent me a long email offering a large settlement if I dropped everything and signed a non-disclosure agreement. I forwarded it to my lawyer with one note: "No deal." Richard showed up at my apartment building one night, looking disheveled. When I refused to come down, he stood outside yelling that I was ruining his life. Security eventually escorted him away. The man who once called me his beautiful trophy was now begging in the street. I stood at my window watching him leave and felt a strange sense of peace. Not joy at his pain, but relief that I was finally free from both of them. The first fall had begun. They were starting to understand the consequences of calling me just a poster girl. But the final confrontation was still coming, the moment when everything would be exposed in front of the entire company. And I was ready. The day of the emergency all-hands company meeting arrived like a storm I had been preparing for months. I walked into the large auditorium wearing a sharp black suit that made me feel powerful instead of pretty. My heart was steady. Lena sat in the back row for moral support. As I took my seat near the front, I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. The tension in the room was electric. Mr. Hargrove stood at the podium looking uncomfortable. Victor Klein sat on the side with a pale face. Richard was also present, invited as outside counsel. They had no idea I had requested to speak. After the initial updates, Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and said, "We also have Sophia Langford here today to address some recent concerns." I stood up and walked to the front without hesitation. The room went completely silent. I looked directly at Victor first. "You called me nothing but a poster girl," I said calmly, my voice carrying through the microphone. "You all laughed and reduced me to my appearance while I was the one quietly saving this company from millions in losses." I clicked the presentation remote. The massive screen behind me lit up with undeniable proof emails, financial records, recordings, and timelines. Slide after slide exposed how Victor and Richard had been working together, how my ideas had been stolen, and how I had been systematically undermined. Gasps spread across the auditorium. I turned to Richard, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. "And you," I said, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. "The man who is supposed to love me, you used me as a trophy while leaking information and planning to leave me after the wedding. You never loved me. You loved what I represented." Richard tried to stand up. "Sophia, this is not the place I cut him off. This is exactly the place. Because you all made it public when you humiliated me in that boardroom. Now you get to face the truth publicly." I continued speaking, revealing everything without anger, just cold, clear facts. I showed how I had single-handedly prevented major breaches while they credited others, how I had been carrying far more than anyone realized. The room was stunned. Some employees looked furious. Others looked ashamed. A few even started applauding. Victor tried to interrupt, his voice shaking. "This is ridiculous. She's exaggerating." I played one final recording, Victor himself calling me a poster girl and laughing with Richard. The entire auditorium heard it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Hargrove looked like he was going to be sick. The board members whispered among themselves. I looked at all of them one last time and said, "I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because I refuse to let powerful men reduce brilliant women to nothing but their appearance. I am not a poster girl. I am Sophia Langford, strategist, intelligence operative, and survivor. And I deserve respect." I stepped down from the stage as the room erupted. Some people stood up and clapped. Others looked at Victor and Richard with disgust. As I walked out, Richard tried to follow me. "Sophia, please. We can fix this." I stopped, looked him in the eyes, and said the words I had waited months to say. "You already broke us, Richard. There's nothing left to fix." I walked away with my head high. Lena waiting for me at the exit with tears in her eyes and a proud smile. The final confrontation was over. The truth was finally exposed in front of everyone who had ever underestimated me. And nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following the all-hands meeting brought real justice, quiet, thorough, and deeply satisfying. Victor Klein was officially terminated 2 weeks later. The board had no choice after the overwhelming evidence. The man who had once mocked me so arrogantly was escorted out of the building by security. I heard he struggled to find another position in the industry. Word of his conduct had spread quickly. Richard's consequences were even more personal. Not only did he lose his position as outside counsel for Apex, but the rival firm he had been leaking information to also cut ties with him. His reputation in legal circles was damaged. The last I heard, he had moved to a smaller firm in another city, far away from the spotlight he once craved. Mr. Hargrove was forced into early retirement. The company issued a formal apology to me and launched a diversity and inclusion review. Several other women came forward after my story, sharing similar experiences. The culture that had protected men like Victor was finally being challenged. On my end, justice felt like freedom. Apex offered me a very generous severance package and a glowing public statement acknowledging my contributions. I declined their offer to return. Instead, I started my own strategic consulting firm, Shadow Protocol Consulting. Within months, I had major clients who valued my real expertise, not just my appearance. The most emotional moment came when I received a letter from my father. He had been following the news. In the letter, he wrote, "I taught you to hold your power in reserve. I'm proud that you finally used it. You are everything I hoped you would become." I cried reading those words. Not from sadness, but from deep release. The daughter who had hidden her strength for so long had finally been seen. Richard tried one last time to reach me. He showed up at my new office looking defeated. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he said quietly. "I lost the best thing I ever had." I looked at him, the man I once loved, and felt nothing but peace. "You didn't lose me, Richard. You never really had me. You had a version of me I created to be loved. That version is gone." I wished him well and closed the door. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. I had reclaimed my career, my voice, and my power. The woman they reduced to a poster girl had risen stronger than they could ever imagine. Justice wasn't loud or cruel. It was simply the natural consequence of their own actions finally catching up to them. I was no longer defined by their betrayal. I was finally, completely, myself. 2 years have passed since that fateful boardroom meeting, and my life now feels like a completely different story one I wrote myself. I sit here today in my bright, modern office, looking out over the Chicago skyline, running my own thriving strategic consulting firm. Shadow Protocol has become respected in the industry for its sharp intelligence work and ethical approach. I no longer hide my capabilities. I lead with them. I'm in a healthy, loving relationship with someone who sees all of me, the strategist, the survivor, and the woman. He celebrates my strength instead of feeling threatened by it. We laugh often, travel when we can, and build a life based on mutual respect. The healing didn't happen overnight. There were still difficult days when old memories would surface and the pain would return. But every time, I reminded myself, I survived their betrayal. I rose above it. I am no longer defined by what they tried to make me. My father passed away last year. Before he died, we had several honest conversations. He told me he was proud of the woman I had become and regretted not protecting me from the world's cruelty, including the cruelty inside our own circles. I forgave him. Holding on to anger only hurt me. Richard and Victor occasionally appear in my thoughts, but they no longer hold power over me. Last I heard, Victor was working at a small firm with a tarnished reputation, and Richard was still struggling to rebuild his career. Their names don't sting anymore. They're just chapters in a book I've already closed. The greatest healing came from helping others. I now mentor young women in corporate America, teaching them to never dim their light just to be liked. I tell them my story, not for sympathy, but as proof that you can survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. I finally understand that the poster girl they saw was never the real me. The real me was always there, strategic, resilient, powerful. She was just waiting for the right moment to step forward. Today, I no longer seek validation from people who once reduced me. I find it within myself. I walk into every room knowing my worth, and I never shrink to make others comfortable. The girl who was once called nothing but a poster girl is now a woman who commands respect, builds empires, and lives with an open heart but never again with blind trust. This is my real happy ending. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. To anyone listening who has ever been reduced, underestimated, or treated like they were just a pretty face, just a helper, just a supporting character in someone else's story, I want you to hear this. You are more than their limited view of you. Your value is not determined by how useful or decorative you are to others. And the moment they try to box you in is the moment you should start preparing to break free. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so powerful, so confident, and so complete that the people who tried to diminish you are forced to watch you shine. I'm Sophia Langford. They called me a poster girl, but I showed them my hidden power. And now, I live freely. Thank you for listening to my story. Wherever you are, remember, your light was never meant to be hidden. Let it burn bright.